Hello, and welcome to the recording of the King County Library System's How to Succeed at DMing Without Really Trying program. My name is Kirsten Erickson, and I am an adult services librarian at the Redmond Library and a member of the Nerd Culture and Fandom programming team. This program is hosted by that programming team of KCLS librarians. A couple of those team members are here. Our moderator is Megan Willen, Adult Services Librarian at the Woodmont Library, and our chat monitor is Jenna Zarzicki, Adult Services Librarian at the Covington Library. I'd like to specially thank Wizards of the Coast, and specifically Shelley Matsunoble, for partnering with us to make this program possible by recruiting our panelists. This is the beginning of a partnership that will bring our community much more fantastic programming. We have a stellar panel of dungeon masters who will impart their hard-won wisdom on running campaigns. Now I will introduce each of them, and then Megan will get the discussion rolling. James J. Hake is the head of Fables at Ghostfire Gaming and has years of 5th edition design experience working with game studios like Wizards of the Coast, Kobold Press, and more. He's designed D&D compatible books like Waterdeep, Dragon Heist, Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, and the Tal'Dorei campaign setting. He loves getting out in the natural splendor of the Pacific Northwest and losing himself in games with stories that stir the heart and set the mind aflame. Mackenzie DeArmas is the associate game designer for D&D at Wizards of the Coast. Her previous credits include lead writer for the Islands of Sina Una, co-designer for MCDM's Kingdoms and Warfare, and lead designer for the ENnie Award-winning Gnarls Candy Compendium. When not rolling dice, she can usually be found rambling into the void on Twitter and coming up with yet another D&D character she'll never get to play. Rafael Bocamazzo, more affectionately known as Dr. B, is a doctor of clinical psychology and the clinical director of Take This, the first mental health nonprofit dedicated to serving the game industry and game community. He has served in this role since 2015, overseeing many of Take This's educational and public-facing programs, also applying his perspective as an autism self-advocate. Outside his work with Take This, Dr. B is an expert on the applied use of tabletop role-playing games in clinical and learning settings, and is the co-creator of a pan-theoretical model on their applied use. He's also one of the chapter authors of Video Games and Well-Being, Press Start, and co-authored Gardens of the Fog, a best-selling mental health-themed charity adventure module for Dungeons & Dragons. Sydney Adams is a game designer for Dungeons & Dragons at Wizards of the Coast. She is best known for her work as the creative lead of the Magic the Gathering Secret Lair, Black is Magic, and as a co-creator of the Planeswalker Basri Ket. She has also worked on Magic the Gathering products such as Throne of Eldraine, Theros Beyond Death, Ikoria, Lair of Behemoths, Zendikar Rising, and the digital TCG Magic Spellslingers. Her work has been featured on Polygon, Hipsters of the Coats, and most recently on an episode of NPR Here and Now. Now we will join the program as Megan asks her first question. How did your first DM experience go?
I decided to run a campaign for some of my cousins, and they're not really into the fantasy setting as much. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do school. You know, everybody understands the concept of school. So I basically like reverse engineered the Acquisitions Incorporated book because I had that for some reason, but not the core three. I don't know why. But either way, I just started making stuff up off the fly, and majority of it was role playing. The first battle, I nearly killed the entire party because they're all level 1, and I saw imps, and I was like, they're tiny, tiny. Yes, tiny means not dangerous. Three imps, and a cultist. And at the end, I realized, oh, they're down, and I just made something up. I'm like, the imp hits his head on the ceiling, and he goes to sleep, you know. But yeah, I think one thing I definitely learned is, one, make sure your encounters like softball. If it's your first time and it's their first time, do something very simple. You don't have to go too abstract. It could be a bandit or something, so you don't kill your party, and then that party slash family doesn't want to play with you anymore. And do not treat monsters like player characters. That was one thing I did when I did my NPCs. I did not match the stat block for them to a monster. I actually built characters for them because I wanted them to feel realistic because they were their classmates. So when I was running combat encounters, I was basically playing, all the enemies and then actually playing a couple characters as well. Don't do that. Just find yourself a stat block.
Thank you. That sounds like an intense first experience. A lot of lessons learned.
It feels better. They were at like an underground party at like the art college. So like they didn't know any of this was going on behind the hood. They were just like, someone's throwing martinis. It was like, yeah, don't worry.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. James, how about you? What was your first DMing experience and what do you wish you knew then?
Oh, my first DMing experience was when I was a sophomore in high school. It was the middle of summer. There was a local game store in Edmonds, Washington, which was just a bus ride away from me where I was at the time. And it was, oh my God, it was the most archetypal gaming store space you can imagine. It was in the basement of a place. There was like, there were a bunch of old nerds running the counter. It was clearly a passion project. There were a whole bunch of tables, a bunch of Warhammer terrain everywhere, and these cubby holes for people to play. There was a soda machine. And so every week we'd gather in the basement of this game store, and we'd play D&D. And I had only played D&D by that point, maybe 3 or 4 games. It was one of my friends in high school who owned all the books. And so I borrowed the core books from them and I just devoured them because up until I'd started playing D&D, I had been really into online RP, forum-based role-playing, which was all very, very loosey-goosey character, story-driven fun. And I really enjoyed it. But I was also super big into video game RPGs. And suddenly it was like, wow, all of my dreams came true. I need to be like a computer and know exactly how everything works. And not only that, I need to make sure I have this entire world built out in whole, completely, with lore dating back thousands of years from the very beginning. And the thing that I learned kind of in the first or second game is that all of that prep that I did didn't matter. Because the only thing that mattered in the very first game was the little town that they were in and the fort that the local duke who gave them their quest lived in, and the forest where the quest took them. And so all of my grand ideas of world-spanning ancient conflicts and warring gods and primordial upheavals didn't matter. And it mattered a little bit eventually, but by the time we'd got to a point where it was significant, the campaign had taken on such a life of its own that it was trying to fit a square peg into this weird kind of like blob-shaped hole. and it was just like, it was so not worth the effort of trying to cram it in there that it just became a point of, well, the campaign had run its course. Time to start a new one using all the lessons I learned over the course of the first one and not be such a stick in the mud about it all.
Thank you. There is such a thing as over preparation, apparently. That's great. Mackenzie, how about you? What was your first DMing experience and what do you wish you knew then?
So I have sort of two short stories. The first is my first time ever being a game master. So my first time ever being like the one who's running a tabletop role-playing game, not just D&D. And the reason why I like telling the story is because I made a grave error. What happened was that I was talking to my mother about like, oh, I love this thing called tabletop role-playing games. I love D&D. It's super cool. It's, we're playing games, but it's also like theater improv. It's super neat. And she was like, oh, that's super cool. you know, your little sister's doing this unit at school for theater, and they have a break in between like their two big productions. And, you know, would you, I volunteered you to run a game for my sister's, you know, theater class. So yeah, you're cool with that, right? And I went, yes. So it turns out the class was 30 people of like, you know, like 30, 10 to 12-year-olds. So my first GMing experience was DMing 30, 12-year-olds. And what I learned was no. I mean, it didn't actually go that, it went really well for all things considered. I basically had them like team up and like they were teams controlling one character. But like, I think the thing I learned mostly from that was I can do this, which I wish it hadn't taken throwing myself into a deep end to teach myself that I had the confidence and that I could actually do this. And it wasn't like, for the longest time I thought like DMs and like game mastering in general was just something that, like, it was a lofty position of, oh, you have to know things, you have to be confident, you have to play the game a lot, and you have to, you know, be an actor and be a game designer and be all these things at once. And I think getting thrown into that situation really taught me you don't have to be everything and do everything, and you are capable of doing this. This is something you can do. That led me to volunteering to DM for the first time through my school's Dungeons and Dragons club. I volunteered to run a one shot, and I was graduating from what I had run with the children, which was one page simple TTRPG, to Dungeons and Dragons, which is a little bit more complex. And so what I did for my first game experience was I basically set everything on a cruise ship. I was like, I want something, I don't want to deal with lots of outside stuff, but I want it to be fun. So I was like, yeah, it's a magical cruise ship. You're all on this magical cruise. You've been hired by someone to guard something. And ooh, I want intrigue. I want, like, you know, multi-layer plot of, you know, oh, red herring after red herring, and like trying to layer in lore in things and trying to know exactly what was going on at every single moment on the ship. And even though it was still like a small microcosm, I wasn't even thinking like as large of a world as like James was, I still felt this intense pressure to know everything and know exactly what might happen when characters do certain things. I was a computer science minor, and it definitely showed in like how I designed, or like I wrote out my notes. I was like, if this, then this, else if this, then this. And I remember at one point while I was DMing, I forgot to name an NPC. And I remember my brain froze and I panicked. And I remember what happened because I panicked and then I didn't want to panic in front of my players was I was just like, I don't know, you name them. And that works. You'd be surprised how well that works to just be like, I don't know, you do it. And so I think from that experience, I learned a lot about the same lessons about over preparation that James did. But the biggest takeaway was that sometimes you can rely on your players to build the world for you and just say, hey, I don't know, what do you see? What do you want to see? And giving them that agency to just build out that little corner of the world, or even just name an NPC when you're stuck. It's really freeing to feel like you don't have to have all the answers, that you don't have to be the god of the table. You can just be another human player. Yeah.
Thank you. Learning you are mortal. That's a great lesson to take away from your first DMing experience. I love it. Dr. P, how did you get started?
I just love that we went full Shakespeare here. Remember, thou art mortal. So I got into DMing, running games through similarly to Mackenzie with a different system, because that's what my friend whose house I hung out at introduced me to, and I was really all about it. But after like 6 months of playing with my friend, and you know, that friend being the only person running games, there were certain things I wanted to see. And so, you know, there were a bunch of friends over for his birthday party one year, like 15, it was like 15, I was 15 years old. And I said, hey, the new players, can I try and run a thing for them? And I didn't prep anything, and I just kind of I just kind of went with it. And I ended up bringing in, because I love movies, I love music, I love media. And I ended up bringing in my love of that and describing this sci-fi setting in this very cinematic, fast-paced kind of thing where I would, as soon as they would get to this tense moment, I would cut away to a different party member. And that was nothing this other DM, or my friend who DM, did. And when they got done with that, we got done with that session, you know, my 5 players came out of there just like, oh my God, that was so amazing. Oh, you've got to have Raphael DM for you. Oh my God. I actually felt a little badly because it was my friend's birthday party, who is our usual DM. But what I wish I knew then, that I carry forward in everything I do, is that you as a DM have needs too. You also have strengths. You also have limitations. And there is no one way to DM correctly. And so much of what goes on at the table is from this interplay between what your players want and what your players are looking for, and your style and your strengths. And so figuring out a good match at the table between your needs and their needs, that is something I wished I learned a lot earlier. It could have saved me a lot of heartache in terms of like working out interpersonal conflict at the table, like taking things personally and not and so forth, when really a lot of it just came down to they wanted to be a murder hobo. I had 4 other players who were not about that, and I had a DM who was not about that. And really, it was just a needs conflict, and there are better fits. And so, yeah, that what I wish I knew is that every DM is a good fit for somebody, just maybe not everybody at your table.
That's a great takeaway, I think. Yeah, learning to find the right table and the right people to play with is a great takeaway from your first experience, which sounds like it was a lot of fun. Sounds like you knocked it out of the park.
I mean, I thought we had fun.
That's always the thing. If you have fun, you've run a good game, right? That's the
Right.
end goal, you know? So thinking on how all of you got started, and I wrote this question as, what is the best way for a brand new DM to get started? But I'm going to take away that best, because I think at this point, we can see that there are a lot of ways for a new DM to get started. What are some things that you suggest that might be different from your own experiences? And I will let anybody who wants to feel strongly about it to jump in.
I guess I'll just continue on with what I was just saying.
Yeah.
Think about what you want to see at a table. Think about what you're good at. Think about, because every single person here who's a panelist has a different lens through which they see things. You know, I'm a doctor of clinical psychology. I'm clinically trained. I've studied psychology for more than a decade, almost 2 decades now. And so I see things through a very specific lens, and that gives me certain strengths in how I DM. And thinking about what you want to see in a game is a really good place to start. And then you just do it. And then you figure out where that maybe you go a little too far with that, and you bring it back a little bit. And over time, through trial and error, and there is trial and error. It's like live theater. If it's not a question of if something goes wrong, it's a question of when something goes wrong and how you deal with it. And through that trial and error, you learn to just kind of roll with it a little bit better. And so think about what you want to see, and then just start doing it.
Yeah, I think sort of like bouncing off of that, something that I hear often people say is that, oh, for if you want to get started, you know, there's a lot of modules to get started on, and that works well for a lot of people. Like a lot of people love these modules, and honestly, like I think they are super fun and these awesome toolkits. But I also know that there are people who, like me, I struggle with processing visual stuff. I struggle with reading and like internalizing that. And I think the best way to get started is to do something you're comfortable with. And if you are comfortable having like an instruction booklet, like I always compare it to like when you get Lego sets. You know, sometimes people are really, really like those sets where there's exactly one set you can build. You get one text, you get one booklet, and it's really great. Other people love the sets where you get like 3 different things and you can build 3 different creatures out of the same exact set of Legos that you get. And they prefer that kind of flexibility to decide what they want. And then some people just like getting Legos in a box with no instructions and you just do whatever. And I think like, because a lot of DMing, a lot of it is a confidence sort of thing. Like you have to feel like you can do it because there's so much pressure and you feel like you are, you know, looking over this massive world and you want to, you know, make sure everyone at the table is having a good time and all that. I think the best way to like help get over that first initial hurdle is to start in a place where you yourself as the DM are comfortable. It's not always just about what everyone else at the table wants. Like Dr. B was saying, like you need to consider what you want and what you're comfortable doing. And if you can figure out where you are comfortable starting out and run something that you're comfortable, you know, making stuff up about on the fly and feeling comfortable in that world to sort of navigate and come and respond to situations that go awry, that is a really good place to start and get your feet wet and get comfortable in the DM's chair.
I can add on to that too. Like, I really believe that you hit the nail on the head. Like, start where you're comfortable. A lot of the first campaigns that I did when I was early in DMing were homebrew for that exact reason. And I have a couple like logistical things. Like one, I would say your first DM experience should be with players that are either your friends or family, because, you know, your confidence isn't going to really be there yet. You know, you may make a few mistakes and you don't want to feel like there are stakes, and stakes in a way that might make you feel like, you know, people will judge you or not give you a little bit of grace as you sort of grow into your DMness. Another thing is that familiar setting. Like, you don't always have to go high fantasy. Sometimes you can do something familiar. You also want to start very small. So scale is a big thing as a new DM. Once again, James did a wonderful example of talking about, like, you know, making something huge, right? Start very limited. And I mean as limited as room, right? One of the earliest campaigns I ever did was with my mother and my sister. And it was a island. Like, basically they were on a ship. They got marooned onto an island, and the entire thing happened in this one specific setting, you know. So there's a lot you can do with it. There could be, you know, it could be a planet that they get marooned on. It could be, you know, another plane. But doing something where you're sort of forced to limit the scope and then allow the players to sort of fill in and sort of follow them, it makes it a little bit easier on you as a new DM. And it gives you a little bit more room to play, especially if you're familiar with the setting. You know, like if you're like all about zombie apocalypses and you could rattle off a couple things without even having to think about it, we have zombie stat blocks, you know. There are so many different monsters now in D&D that you can come with story first and then figure out what mechanics and what rules will then work towards your vision.
Oh, can I just jump on one of those points really quickly that Sydney just made about scale? Scale also, especially if you've got new players, makes it easier for them as well. At smaller scale, because they don't have to remember as much. I've got a routine one shot I tend to run with new players that it's just the local prize pig went a missing.
James, any advice?
This is a hard question for me to answer, because when it comes to DMing, I know myself and I know the things I've learned. And I am aware that there are a million different types of people in the world, and I hate to generalize my advice because everything that's true for one person is completely false for someone else, and vice versa. I guess I'll say this. One of the things that really opened my mind to what being a new DM is like is listening to the first chapter of The Adventure Zone, the D&D podcast by the McElroy brothers, because even though that podcast and that campaign took on a life of its own, it started using the D&D starter set, Adventure Lost Mines of Phandelver. And you can see throughout that how it kind of begins as the pre-written adventure begins, with some minor variations in like character names to make it a little bit more comedic, and kind of some cuts to the adventure to make it flow better and make it snappier. And by the end of it, it's off the rails completely. And that's exactly how, in my mind, a D&D adventure should go, because you as a DM are not beholden to what's written out for you. All of that is, to paraphrase the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, is more like a guidelines, right? People like to apply that quote to the rules of D&D a lot, and that's mostly true, but it's very true for pre-written adventures. Those pre-written adventures are a starting place for you to kind of not worry about the big details of the thing. If the Forgotten Realms has gods, you've got the Forgotten Realms gods. That's something off of your mental plate you don't have to deal with. The town of Phandalin has this, and this. You don't have to include them all, but if you suddenly need a blacksmith, they've got a blacksmith for you. You don't have to worry about all the minutia that's provided to you. It's just there at your fingertips. If you want it. And if you'd rather make something up than go digging in the book, because you suddenly have this genius idea for a blacksmith with a funny voice in your head who is a goblin that has ears made out of bronze. I made that up in 3 seconds, right? Exactly. Make that up and just go for it. And don't feel like you've been shackled to what someone else has written. I write stuff like that all the time. You won't offend me if you change what I've written. I write it because I want you to change it. That's how this stuff goes.
Yeah, I think like it's a really big thing, especially like as someone who also like creates D&D. It's created with the intent of being ripped apart and used in the way you want it. It is written to be not destroyed, but dismantled and then reassembled in the way you as the person wants it. If we wanted to write like a concrete story with a concrete finish, we'd write a novel.
Mhm.
But we're not writing novels, we're writing D&D. It is intentionally built to be reshaped and reworked, and that's what makes it so much fun.
There's one more thing I want to
it's a
say before I'm
toolbox.
done. It's something that Sydney, you said earlier about genres and starting where you want to go. And I know this is a Wizards of the Coast panel, and it's about D&D, and I love D&D with all my heart. It's the game I play most. It's a game that I always go back to. It's a game that everyone knows. There's a lot of games that do other genres better than hacking D&D into it. Like there are zombie apocalypse RPGs out there, and a huge strength of D&D is that everyone knows it. It's got a common rule set. People know how to get into it real easily. But if you're new, and if everyone you're playing with is new, and you have heard of an awesome zombie apocalypse RPG, and you talk to other people online that said this zombie apocalypse RPG kicks butt, don't try and hack D&D into a zombie apocalypse game. Go play that cool zombie apocalypse game. If that's what you want, take it.
Straight from the creators of D&D content. Play games your way. I love it. I think this ties into one of our other questions, which is that improvisation is an important tool in DM's toolkit. What advice do you have for DMs who want to get better at making it up on the fly? And Mackenzie, I know this is a passion of yours. Do you want to get the conversation rolling?
Oh, no one ever talks about like how to improv in D&D, and it's really a shame because honestly, you're improving 90% of the time or 50% of the time, sometimes 90 if you are a DM like me who prepares like 3 notes, exactly 3 bullet points, and that's it. I think I always like to approach improv, especially when I'm DMing, with the mindset of finding the magic in the mundane. Like, I think when you DM, there's this, especially when you DM and you are entering this fantasy world and you feel like you're the one creating essentially a gateway into this epic high fantasy sort of landscape, and you have this pressure to make everything feel epic, to make everything feel like it has weight and has ties to some long forgotten lore or gods or monsters, that you kind of forget how fun and important and quite frankly really interesting like regular life stuff is. Like when I need to create an NPC name, like I will sometimes think about like, oh, you know what, I met this really cool person while I was at Starbucks the other day, and they had this really cool like laptop bag and this really cool hairstyle and these really cool glasses. Okay, I'm going to not base it off of that person, but look, that I those are three characteristics I can go off of. And maybe there aren't laptops in this setting, so let's give them something else. I don't know, it was really colorful. They have a parrot now. Cool. It's this really cool half-elf scholar with big, like thick black rimmed glasses, really colorful hair that's been like styled into this thick braided sort of mohawk-esque mane, and they've got this really colorful parrot on their shoulder whose feathers almost seem tie-dyed and flickering with magic. That came from a guy I met at Starbucks, and he somehow seems magical because for the people in that world, that magical life is mundane. It's very easy to take what you can see in your everyday life and make it fantasy. I made a whole setting based off my college home, like my college town, purely because I was so bored. I was like, there has to be something interesting here. I have to be able to make something out of this town that seems stuck in time and continually repeating itself over and over. And through doing that exercise, I realized you can find magic in everyday things. Not everything in your world has to be fantastic. You can just rip names from the things you see in everyday life. Just look outside your window, or look at the table next door, like over yonder, and name your person after the first two objects you see. Like, and then of course the other trick is just ask your players to fill it in. They have just as much control over a paintbrush as in painting this landscape as you do. And you, as much as we joke that the DM is the god of the table, really not. You can pass that beauty off to someone else for a little bit and just be like, I don't know what you see. What do you see? Describe to me what you see. There you go. Now it's no longer the onus is no longer on you.
Mackenzie, what you said made me think of something that I would describe as in improv, you are what you eat. When it comes to improv, you put out the things you put in, and they're filtered through yourself, through your personality, through your lived experiences, through all of that. But the things you see in your everyday life, the things you read in books, the things you watch in movies, all of that, those are the things that will come out when you improv. Because when you're improvising, you're not planning, you're not thinking, you're not digging deep into the brain and pulling out something deep within you. You're firing the first neuron that activates when someone says something. It's like, it's basic. If A, then what is A? B, and all of that. And if you find that if you find that your improv isn't interesting to you, if you feel like those first reaction moments are boring or trite, or they're not what you want to come out of you, that's fine, because you can change that. You can change what your media diet is. You can intentionally reframe your cognition to have your first reaction be framed differently. If you're running a dark fantasy game of D&D, and you keep and your players use stuff, and you keep improvising these very sort of floaty, magical, sparkly, heroic, epic things, then it's probably because you're really well versed in epic, heroic, optimistic fantasy, and you might just need to buckle down and watch a bunch of The Witcher and read a bunch of Black Company and stuff like that, and get your brain in the right space for it. And if just consuming isn't enough, then maybe take a moment and write some notes. Think about what really catches on you, and then you'll start to internalize all of that, and your improv will be filtered through it naturally.
Buckle down and watch The Witcher is such an ominous statement, and I can't pinpoint why.
The Witcher is ominous.
It's just like, you just need to buckle down and watch The Witcher. Do it. I don't know why I'm like, I feel like that's a little bit of a threat, but
Well, for improv, I have one exercise that could potentially help you. Once again, these are things that work for me. Feel free to try them out. I hope they work for you. And then one cheat code, because improv is coming up on the spot, but you could pretend to improv. That's what random encounter tables are. you know. But one exercise I do it either with a person or with myself. I do it with myself now because I quarantine. But anyways, I do this thing where I do, you know, the endless story that used to play when you were in like middle school, where like you're like I, and then someone's like 8, and another person's like you know, dog. So what I'll do, right, is I will just start rambling off a story and not think and just keep going, right? And then I will listen back to what I said and figure out how coherent was what I just said. You know, you enter into the forest, and before you see a red apple. The apple, you know, stares at you with its eyes, and it's like, wait, the apple has eyes? And I'm like, I'm gonna go with it, you know, because the moments, right? The moments in which the player, or the moments in which you go, is when you, the DM, don't believe what you're saying. If you say anything with conviction, the player is gonna believe it. You know, good improv is just saying what you said and meaning it. You know, if you go into there and you're like, and the bartender's name is Schmitty, like his name is Schmitty, you don't be like, Schmitty McGiggles, you know, like his name is Schmitty McGiggles. Then he turns to you and he says, I've been in 7 wars. Don't you dare say a thing about my name. You know, like commit to whatever works. And if you play that game with like another person, that also strengthens it because you don't have any control over what they're going to say. So like I do it with my sister. I'm like, and we'll do it by line if we're feeling particularly like I'm not going to do it word by word, and that's in the way to strengthen it. The way to cheat code it, what I do is I give myself a safety net every time I want to do anything crazy improv. So I'll just get like a piece of paper and I'll do 4 quadrants, and I'll put NPCs down, random down, loot down, and then like third thing. Third thing is usually setting specific. So what I'll do is I will just like jot down a couple names that I could be an NPC. Like I don't jot down any characteristics, but for me, I know that my weakness is names. And especially since you're gonna have to like lore, keep that afterwards, since that's gonna be canon, like I'll just write it down and I'll sort of have it as a thing. Random is just something that fits the setting, the horror setting. An example might be, you know, after they just defeated the thing, you know, and they decide to walk on, and you're kind of thinking, okay, what's the moment? You can be like, everybody stop. Give me a perception check. And set it in your head for like, okay, 15 or something, they hear something. And it's like, you know, you can hear what sounds like somebody raking their nails along the wall. And that could be it. Doesn't have to actually lead to anything, but that interaction then allows the players to continue the story without you having to actually micromanage it, and allows them to stay situated.
You know, everybody here has said some amazing things that I take to heart. That, you know, Mackenzie said, rely on your players. I do that all the time. I let them make stuff up for me. That's wonderful. James said, you are what you consume with media. I steal liberally and reskin from every form of media I watch. One of my players' favorite characters is basically William J. Lepetamain from Blazing Saddles, and he runs a kingdom. But also Sydney, actually with that character, Sydney is right about committing to that. And depending on your DM style, I'd say get impulsive. Okay. Really just go with the first thing that comes to mind. They commit to it. That king that I just mentioned, that's basically William J. Lepetamain from Blazing Saddles. He was King Bob. What kingdom does he run? What? I'm sorry, what was that? You heard me. Lots of consonants in that. He's a little senile. He changes the name regularly, and that became their favorite setting. It was something I couldn't think of it. I just impulsively blurted out, and we just rolled with it. Now, admittedly, they were teenagers, but they loved it. Some of my adults that I play with, it's the same thing. They love how ridiculous it is, and that we just commit to how ridiculous it is. And this is just a reskinned Mel Brooks character who runs the kingdom. with his vizier, who's also a reskinned Mel Brooks character. But in terms of being able to practice that, there's a game that my friends and I play that you might try at home with your friends, and that is You're the World's Greatest Expert. And where you have to pretend to be the world's greatest expert on whatever topic they suggest. You may know nothing about it, but on the spot, you have to pontificate and explain all of the nuance of whatever topic they come up with, whether it's mop handles. And let me talk to you about the difference between hickory and oak mop handles and wax varnishes versus polyurethane varnishes, because it's a world of difference. Practicing being able to come up with, just lock onto those mundane details like the varnish selection is going to up your improv game, especially if you commit to it. And when you've got 5 other players at the table and they're feeding you clues to improv into, even better.
I do want to say though, as much as we say commit, like with like all underlined, as a DM, you are also always free to go, I messed that up. Let's try again. Like, because here's the thing, when you are DMing and even when you are a player, you should always have the freedom to go, I messed that up actually. I didn't mean that. I was running off of information that I misinterpreted because I'm human and I misinterpreted what was going on. Let me try it again. There's a really good thread by my good friend Justice Armand on Twitter that talks about do-overs. And I think it's important to remember that even though like you want the game to feel real and you want like to be like role playing and you're creating the story, in the end it is a collaborative story that is not necessarily being written down save for the notes you make at the table. It is mutable. The world is literally not set in stone because you are putting it into existence as you speak, and we are human, we speak errantly, and it is okay to mess up and say no, I'm redoing that, I'm retconning. There's such a big like thing in fandom culture where it's like, oh, everything has to be canon, it must be canon, if it's not canon then they messed it up. And it's like, I mean, you want that pressure, and if you really enjoy like lore and canonicity, then maybe do that in your game. But I think if it's stressing you out to remember everything, to feel like you have to be confident and know everything, give yourself the grace to go, I messed up. Let's rewind and try again.
Well,
Yeah.
And on that, I think about your favorite comic characters. How many times have they probably died in the comics? And how many times has that been retconned and you still read?
Yeah. Like
How many times have they?
There was one campaign I had where like we were doing a one shot, and like I think like I had this whole thing planned for them to be like, you know, spending so much time in the tavern and stuff. And, you know, someone was just casually being like, oh, what's the tavern made of? And I was like, oh, it's, you know, an old wooden tavern. They're like, I burn it down. And I was like, okay. They evacuated everybody, right? They like planned it out, got everybody out, burned it down. There goes 2 hours of what would have been the rest of the evening. So that's another thing too. Like you can only improv so much. So give yourself definitely that grace. You can only commit so much. After that, I was like, all right, take 10. Let's go get some dinner because I need to figure this out. You know. But yeah, I think don't take it too seriously unless that's your style.
Be confident, but understand that sometimes the most confident thing you can do is say, I confidently have no clue what's going on.
Take 5.
I think your point about rewinds and do-overs and retcons, Mackenzie, brings us into the periphery of the topic of like safety tools. And I know that's something we want to talk about, and I don't want to jump the gun if that's not what we're about, but this is basically a safety tool. It's something that people should agree upon at the beginning of a game. God, I want to just use this jargon. I want to talk about session zeros and all this stuff. We should maybe stop and define our terms real quick. But yeah, stuff like do-overs and all that is something that everyone should agree upon and say, this is something we have on the table. Everyone should know. It shouldn't come out of nowhere. And just so you know, we might I want everyone, not just the DM, but all the players, to be able to say, actually, that's not what I meant to say. That makes me feel like uncomfortable, or it compromises the integrity of my character's personality, or this or this or this, and I'd like to retcon it in some way. And there will be gradations of what people will think is legit to retcon like that. If you the game or story consequences of your game, people might feel like you're having a bit of a cheat. If you're like, oh, that turned out badly for me, I'd like to rewind before that thing happened badly for me. I think most people would agree that that's, to a certain degree, probably not what they want. But every group is different, right? You won't know what people are okay with or not okay with until you sat down and had an honest conversation with them, and treated them like adults who you're trying to have fun with, and not people who you're trying to pull a fast one over on.
Yeah, this is once again where my experience in mental health really comes into things. Like, if you go in to see a mental health professional, there is this concept of informed consent. Like, you are supposed to be told what's the process of therapy, what you're supposed to be told about all of your rights as a patient or client, whichever terminology you or your clinician like to use. And just because that's all spelled out for you doesn't mean the therapy is going to be less effective. In fact, it probably means it's going to be more effective, because you as a client have an understanding of the framework in which you can act, and your therapist has an idea for the framework in which they can act. It's no different for a preparation session or session 0. You as a DM and your players are both coming to an agreement of what are the limits, where are the borders in the sandbox in which you can play, and if you go outside of that border accidentally or on purpose, how do you rectify it and get it back to where all of you feel safe enough to explore?
That's a wonderful point. And I think it plays into, we're going to get really close to rounding out our prepared questions here. So we will, after just this next one, open it up to everything that's come into chat. I've seen some wonderful questions scrolling by, but I really did want to get to this one question, which I think ties into what we're talking about here a little bit, which was, how do you recognize your limits as a DM and avoid burnout? And Dr. B, you were going to define burnout for us to kick this conversation off.
Yeah, because it's something I speak to in the game industry a lot. Burnout is a lot of people talk about burnout like it's just being overworked or you're just doing too many things, but it's more than just being exhausted. Yeah, that's one part of it. But the most well-known model of burnout from 1981, I won't get too deep into that, has 3 parts to it. One is exhaustion, so you're overworked. The other is a sense of ineffectiveness. Basically, nothing you're doing is making a difference, or you feel like nothing you're doing is making a difference. But the third part of it is a disconnect from yourself and other people, cynicism, anger, irritability. And those are really the 3 signs that I look for when I'm talking to people about their burnout. Do they feel ineffective? Do they feel disconnected? And are they overworked? And it's the same thing with being a DM. Are you getting the rewards you're looking for, whether intrinsic or extrinsic? Do you feel a sense of connection with your fellow players? Do you feel like everything's fair around the table? Do you feel like your workload is okay? So yeah, those are the major 3 parts to burnout.
So for the rest of the panel, and you too, Dr. B, how do you avoid that in the DM space, and how do you recognize your limits?
I can say for myself, the times that I have felt most burned out as a DM are the times that I have felt excessively dedicated to what I think should happen instead of what I actually want. Or put another way, I feel burned out when I start ignoring my needs as a DM because I feel like a campaign should be this, that, or the other thing. there are a lot of stories of sort of brutish DMs who are selfishly absorbed with their plot and they railroad their characters. And I think personally, I have, and I know there are a lot of other people too, have it kind of internalized those stories and say, well, I will not be one of those DMs. I will not railroad my players. I will put my players above myself every day of the week. Don't do that. You're playing this game too. You should have fun when you're DMing. If you've lost track of the fun, of course you're going to get burned out. So don't ever lose sight of the fun. Find a way that you can find fun that is mutually beneficial for everyone, or if nothing else, find ways to have some fun for everyone at different times, because you can't genericize fun for everyone. Make sure that there's something for everyone, and that includes you.
Sorry if you see me shooing that my puppy is on the floor. I just heard a bang. I was like, what are you doing? Anyways, I think finding the fun, like when you lose the fun, burnout, like that's exactly it. That's the exact point. And I'm a try hard for sure, you know, like I'm the person who has like the Google Doc when the campaign starts, and I like spend an hour just naming it, and I like enjoy like the robustness of a table of context. I just update it like if it shifts a page. Like I'm that kind of person. When I felt the time I actually did get burned out once, and that actually ended the campaign, like we just dropped it. It makes me sad still thinking about it. Was when I also felt that the players were no longer engaged, right? Because it's like you got to think you're spending 2-3 hours minimum to prep this thing, you know, like you schedule everybody, you get everybody in the room, you know, you deal with any technological issues, you plan out the maps, there's so much work that goes into it. What I had for like 2 months is that I just had players dropping without any notice. I'd be waiting and it'd be just me and one other player. And I'd be like, look, just tell me, please just communicate, please just email. And I basically had to threaten. I'd be like, look, we've missed the last 3 sessions. You know, I'm trying hard to engage you. If there's something about it you don't want to do, if you don't want to do it, let me know. But it was just like shouting into a void. And I just stopped prepping for it. And I started to dread it because instead of thinking about, is this going to be fun? It was like, are they going to show? Right. And sometimes, yeah, that is the sadness of a DM. Like, sometimes you just can't control your players. Sometimes the players can cause the burnout. Like, that's why it's always important to remember that the DM is also a player. You know, you have to look out for each other. If you're starting to see that your DM's looking a little worn, it's okay to tell them. Like, I had a DM that I'm in a campaign right now. We took off till June because I noticed that every time we started, they took like a shot of espresso and they were just tired, and it was after work. And I was like, look, you know, you can take a break. And it's like, yeah, I love this. I'm like, I know you love this, but you know, you can take a break. And they didn't tell me that they listened to me. They just like told everybody like, yeah, we're going to do it in June. We're just going to take a break. And I'm like, yes, I'm proud of you.
I think like a big thing, like I burn out and I struggle the most when I'm DMing, when there is that like sense of a breakdown in communication. I can't read facial expressions well. It's a part of my disability. I just can't read facial expressions. I can't understand tone, and I struggle when I'm DMing to try and essentially triangulate what people's faces are making with how they're sounding and speaking, and trying to figure out the question of, are they having fun? And I remember I get so stressed when I would feel like I let my players down because I felt like I was misreading them, or I misread them during the game, and I'm sitting like 2 hours later after the game going, I think I messed up, but I can't pinpoint why. And I'm stuck in the cycle of wondering, what did I do? What did I do well? What didn't I do well? And that really hurt me. And it wasn't fun for me. And it was just, DMing became so stressful because it was just this cycle of, I need to keep presenting like I know what I'm doing and I'm comfortable and I'm fine, and I have to keep this game going for my players because it means so much to them. And so I found the solution to helping alleviate that was to do something that's essentially have an open door policy as a DM. After every session, no matter who I played with, I'd always say, yeah, so I like to have an open door policy. Please feel free to talk to me about anything good or bad. Just send me a message. I have my door open. Send me a message on like a DM, or you can message in the group chat. I don't care. Like just leaving it open, and also opening that conversation before we get started and just being like, this is what I want from the game. This is what I'm thinking of. This is the genre. This is my setting. This is kind of where I kind of would like it to go. Maybe like in a general sense, the story arc I'd like, but like being able to just discreetly say, this is what I want. Here's my doors open for communication. Please tell me both good and bad. You don't have to just come talk to me about the bad stuff, because that makes it also extremely stressful. And so just, and that sort of plays back into what we were talking about, safety tools and, talking to your players beforehand. And that's how a lot of issues that come up between like DMs and players, a lot of times it's down to the DM wants something or the players want something, but it's never explicitly said. And I think we put so much pressure on, oh, we want the story surprise. We want to keep secrets from each other because, oh, the dramatic reveal. And I found this in playing games as a player. If you tell your friends, like, hey, I have a secret and I'd like to reveal it, it's still just as cool when it's revealed in game, even if they know it's coming. You don't have to give them every detail, but just telling them, yeah, no, I'd like you to like get into this general area because there's something I want to happen. Then they know, and then it helps. What were you gonna say, Dr. B?
Well, I was gonna say a mutual friend of a lot of ours, Lauren Urban, said something in one of my streams once that just stuck with me, and that's just because you know how a roller coaster works doesn't mean it's not fun. And a lot of to jump on what you're saying, Mackenzie, we talk about D&D as a collaborative storytelling medium, but very often we ostracize ourselves from collaborating with the players themselves. 90%, whenever people ask me, what do I do when? 99% of the time it's talk to your players, collaborate with them, get feedback on them. But one of the things Mackenzie also is touching on that I want to make sure I also touch on, I'm very public about my autism. And that brings with it certain cognitive and sensory challenges. I have a hard time juggling multiple sources of information. Much like Mackenzie, I cannot run pre-written modules. I have done it 3 times. Twice it's been something I was the co-writer on, and I messed up all 3 times. But one of the things I learned about my limits, especially with my sensory idiosyncrasies, is that being a DM online is really difficult for me without a lot of preparation, because everybody's voice comes through with the same degree of salience, and I can't filter it out. And I found myself getting irritated with my players, and that's not fair to them. So learning about it, saying I'm at my limit, let's figure out a way to make this work for everybody, is a really, really mature and advanced way of approaching things at the table. Truly not just stopping the collaboration when the game ends, but collaborating between games as well. Mm-hmm. That's an important thing people forget.
Yep.
Man, Mackenzie, when you started talking, I was getting sad, because that just was hitting so close to home for me. Mm-hmm. A lot of my biggest DM burnout actually happens when I'm putting my heart and soul into a campaign, and it's not even the player's fault that they aren't giving me the feedback I need. It's because I am putting so much into the game. I'm expecting kind of an equal level of feedback out from every single person at the table, and there is definitely some validity to that. But I also know that for myself as a person, part of that needs to be recalibrating my expectations, because only I'm in my own head, and only my players are in their own heads. And if I can just come from a place of assuming that my players are having an awesome time, and if they weren't, they wouldn't be coming back week after week. And if they weren't, they wouldn't be saying, yeah, I had a great time. My players aren't lying to me. They're my friends. They aren't lying to me. They love it. They just may not have the energy to explain to me every week why they're having a great time or anything like that. And it comes down to a matter of just like trust with people. Trust they're having a good time. Trust you're having a good time. Trust everyone wants to have fun.
And trust that if you bring up, hey, I was hoping to run a more roleplay heavy game. Is there anything I can do to help, encourage roleplay? Or hey, I was wanting to really, I'm playing a fighter. I'd love to fight things more. Could we fight some more things, please? And just trusting that should you bring that up to the table, they'll go, oh, I didn't know that. I'm so sorry. We'll do that. Because 90% of the time, that's what'll happen. You don't have to, you're not a machine. You don't have to deliver everything your players want. You don't have to try and read minds either. You can, I see so many times that people saying like, oh, I want this out of my game and I'm struggling. And oftentimes the answer to, or at least not an answer, but a starting point is, well, let's, have you talked to your group about it? Have you said, hey, I was really hoping to run a game that was more roleplay-y, and I've noticed that you don't really like, or you haven't engaged in the roleplay as much? Is there a way that I can help you feel more comfortable role-playing? What would be a good way to push you to do that? How can I help? And I think that's a really good starting point. It will not solve everything, but it's a good place to sort of get your feet down and stop that ephemeral sort of, I want something and I don't know how to subliminally communicate it across like my words. Help.
Sometimes those words, they're hard.
They are hard.
Yeah.
But like if you trust the people around your table, then like you can fumble through the words all you want because the people around the table trust you and they'll give you the space to figure out the right words you need to express what you want.
Exactly. Well, let's get some questions from our chat. So I'm going to have Jenna take over. She's got your questions and she will be asking them. And we want to get through as many as we can. So maybe we'll do one person per question, if that's okay with everybody from our audience. Take it away, Jenna.
All right. First of all, thank you, chat, everyone, for such awesome questions. I can already tell that we're not going to have quite enough time to get through them all, but I absolutely have every single one of them written down. And if we're able, we're going to follow up with you in your post-program email. I tried to kind of mush some of them together, so you may recognize bits and pieces of your question together, just if they were on the same theme. So we'll try to get through as many as we can. Thanks again for your questions. They were great. So panel or whomever would like to answer, what are some tools or methods you use to get meaningful feedback from your players post-session?
I guess I could jump in just to confirm if this is, am I to assume like after every session or just in general?
I think let's start with general, just kind of ease of feedback for your players.
Got it. We didn't really get to cover it, but this kind of feeds back a little bit into the sort of session 0 thing. Just to make it known, a session 0 is basically a meeting that you have prior to the actual start of the campaign, where the players and the DM basically outline everything that they expect from the campaign, everything they do not want to see, like, there are some people who prefer the setting to be as realistic as possible with real stakes and grittiness, and there are other people who don't want as much of that. They want to be able to potentially avoid certain topics that may be triggering. And so that session 0 is very fundamental, I think, to being able to sort of get that initial feedback that you will continue to inform your campaign throughout the time. Like, for example, I don't play anything that involves abuse. I don't, involve anything that involves anything with children getting injured in any way. Those are just things that I personally don't DM. And so no one ever asked for it, but it's just stuff that you sort of ask at the beginning. After that session 0, right? What I would suggest is you should have a sort of a hand signal. So if you're ever in a game and you let people know, if you're ever uncomfortable, you don't have to tell me why. You don't have to explain yourself. Just raise 2 fingers, or just, do this and let me know that something is thing, and I will just immediately shift topic. I won't even, I won't even make it awkward. And then I can talk to you afterwards to get your feedback. If you're looking for feedback that's specific to how you're doing, whether people are enjoying it, I personally wouldn't suggest after every single session, because that can be a little draining on both people. But I do love check-ins. I usually establish in session 0 how often they want me to check in, and then I'll check in a little earlier than and then I'll check in sort of less as we go on. So after 2 sessions, I'll check in and be like, how's everybody doing? Or after 4 sessions, I will basically let people know at the start of that game that we're going to do a check-in at the end, and that they can also just message me privately. And the feedback, honestly, you can use forms if you want to be more formal, but to be honest, speaking face to face, just taking the time for a phone conversation or a chat or an email if it's uncomfortable is probably just the best way to do it. And then just basically, I usually ask, based on what we established in session 0, are you feel like we're meeting those goals? Are you having fun? Has anything changed for you? Do you want to do anything differently? And I just kind of just hit all those, take that with me, and then refresh.
That's fantastic, Sydney. Thank you for that insight. And also thanks to everybody who's using chat to kind of let us know their own ways of doing things. That's really useful. The next group of questions was kind of about meaningful stakes and buy-in. So somebody would like to know what motivation can you set for a party that is level 17 plus for a one-shot? Other people are asking about one-shots and having issues creating kind of good rewards for those. And somebody else is wondering, if you don't want to kill your players, can you still make good stakes? Which I know is a lot crammed in, but essentially, how do you make it worthwhile?
I've got something really quick to say on this, and I don't think it will cover every question, but it will gently caress all of them. And it is this: the best stakes for a D&D game are ones that involve the characters and not the plot. This is a character-motivated game. I, as an adventure writer, am very, very aware that I am writing a story for a set of main characters whose identities I know nothing about, which can make it challenging to write an adventure in advance. So the way around that as a DM, whether you're running a pre-written module or whether you're coming up with something all of your own, is to think about the characters who you are running for, learn as much about them as you can in advance if you want, and then make sure that you insert a little something. It doesn't have to be a full plot arc. It can be like a gentle callback to something that they want, a personality trait that they have, something that will specifically hook a character into doing something and engages that character. And those things, if you have a player who's also interested in engaging with their character motivation, will snowball. There are absolutely characters who are just there to be there. They're there as a proxy for a I often play characters like that. I love to be on the ride for a cool story that a DM wants to tell. And the best thing that a DM can do is ask, hey, are you here for your character's story? Or are you here to be along for the ride? And that answer will tell you so much about what makes up your group and who you should cater character-specific things for. And that's a question you can ask multiple times, right? If someone who's along for the ride sees player C getting their character catered to, and they're like, hey, wait a second, that seems kind of cool. Ideally, the player should be proactive and tell you, but many will be shy or anxious, or they'll just want to be they'll want the DM to come to them. So having that sort of question crop up every now and then, every 10 sessions, 15 sessions, we've got a long ongoing campaign. It's good to revisit that gently every now and then. Again, don't hammer home the feedback every single game. That's exhausting. But check in every now and then. See how people are feeling. See what they want.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the gentle caress of the mishmash of questions there. We got a lot of questions about being interactive and engaging your characters. So how do you get your players inspired and excited about the story? How do you fill a silence? How do you kind of help out your shyer players who just don't want to talk unless it's absolutely necessary?
I run into this when I'm teaching clinicians and teachers how to play role-playing games, and demonstrate as the DM the behavior you want to see. Abandon yourself to it. If you want to see people get into their roles, you just go with it. You demonstrate it. You be cinematic. You be big. You just be as large as you can. Don't be afraid to be over dramatic, because if you sometimes you've got players like James said who are just along for the ride, and cool, that's fine. If they're happy doing that, and don't force people to do what you want, of course. But what I found in teaching people who have never played role-playing games this before, that after a while of seeing me just be big and dramatic and cartoony and overacting and just totally chewing the scenery, they'll up their commitment like maybe 25-50%. And then that snowballs around the table because there's a safety and trust to being silly. We as adults, just abandoning ourselves to the nature of play is transgressive as adults. And if you, as the DM, are just throwing yourself into it with wanton abandon, and somebody else starts to, you're going to create you're going to subtly create an environment where it's okay to do that if they want.
I'll add another quick little thing to that too. Another approach I really like to use, because I have had like painfully shy players. I like to, and once again, this is due to the player's comfort level and stuff, but once they give me the archetype of what their character is, I like to throw in things like in session 0, I usually establish like, how much are you allowing me to add onto your story? How much are you allowing me to run with your story? So like I had one character in one campaign, painfully shy, chose a wizard, but she did say I asked her, do you have any siblings? And she told me she had a brother, didn't give me any details. So one time I just had, her brother just show up randomly. And now she had to act that out because that's her brother, and she was initially a little awkward, but then I just had the brother saying crazy stuff. This was like a college setting. So he was just like, are you okay? Are you drinking your protein? Because he was like on the soccer team, and he was like super, super buff fighter. And he was like, I'm really worried about you. You're not drinking your protein. You look thin, and because of that annoyance, she immediately got annoyed by her brother and then flipped into how she would react naturally. And that was her first experience of sort of role playing. So I think basically what I'm trying to say is you can lean heavily into your players' lore to engage them specifically. Like, it is okay. You're not like targeting them and being like, speak, right? You're just asking them, can I add more? Can I engage you? Can I have your father call you? Can I have a letter from this relative you've never met show up and say that they need you because the land is dying and you don't know what that means? Can there be a ring only you can interpret? Just look. Another thing, DM, you should pay attention to the languages that your players speak, because I feel like that's one really good tip. Like, if you see that only one player, like that shy player, only speaks giant, just drop something in giant in the campaign that only they can understand, and let them interpret and let them share that information to the entire party.
Sydney, that was an awesome answer. Thank you so much. I am very sorry to say that I have to shut this thing down. We have so much more to cover, but we have made so much progress. We have talked about so many things. I thank each and every one of you. If we could take like 2 minutes to really quickly run around, if there's something coming up that you're excited about, something you just want to bring folks attention to, please do that right now. Go James.
I will start. I'm James Hake. I am the head of Fables at Ghostfire Gaming. I highly recommend you keep an eye on the 5th edition D&D stuff that Ghostfire Gaming is coming out with. Keep abreast of their Twitter, their Facebook, of all of that. I have very many exciting things to announce in the near future. And I'll drop my Twitter handle in chat.
I just dropped mine. You can find me at Raini, RAINI_Fro at Twitter. I put all the stuff that I do on there. So just, that's the spot.
Yeah, you can find me over on Twitter at Mackenzie Lane DA. I've also put it in the chat because my name does not have a C in it. And, you know, it just gets spelled wrong a lot. There's not a lot I can talk about because NDAs are a thing, but if you want to see me yell into the void about other things that I can talk about, check me out there. And I also retweet a bunch of cool stuff that my friends are doing, like stuff that James is releasing, that stuff like Dr. B is doing, cool charity events, all that good stuff. Take it away, Dr. B.
You can find I just posted it in the all my socials are the Dr. B on everything, and for my professional work, aside from me ranting about food and tabletop games, Take This org. But yeah, follow Take This for all the charity work I do in the mental health sphere, and yeah.
Thank you guys very much. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to Wizards of the Coast for making this possible. Thank you to the Nerd Culture and Fandom Programming team, my buddies. And thank you all of the participants for coming in this evening, giving us fantastic questions. We're going to ask the presenters if they have time to field some of the questions via email, if they've got the capacity for that. So with that, have a fantastic evening, everyone. Thank you so much. This was fantastic. Good night, everybody.